Welcome to the Chaos Sector. We continue with the political matrix. We touch on the Uvalde mass shooting hoax, but not in depth. Children are being used for political propaganda, but we find it absolutely disgusting to even mention children. It is uncivilized to focus on innocent children, and it goes to show how demented the opposition is. We focus on the adults, from those who participate in the hoaxes, authorities, firemen, paramedics, federal government, politicians, to mainstream media. They will do whatever it takes to control the masses. And if that means using children in nationally covered so-called mass shootings, they will do it without question. With that being said, let's get started.
Disturbing conspiracy theories about the Uvalde school shooter are being spread on social media and other fringe platforms. In a now deleted tweet, one user posted an image of someone they claimed to be the gunman, but the photo was actually of a 22-year-old trans woman who lives in New York City. Other people are falsely claiming the shooter was an illegal immigrant and that the massacre was staged.
Now, out of all this fabricated nonsense, the key element is that the shooting was staged. They slipped that in, along with the theory of it being a transgender woman, or the suspect being an illegal immigrant. Out of the three so-called theories, which one do you think will get the most attention in the media? That's right, that the so-called suspect was a transgender. Even more than it being staged? Well, of course, the media doesn't want that theory to set too long.
For more on this, let's bring in CBS News technology and politics reporter Muzadik Badar. Now, Muz, when did these false claims about the shooting suspect begin, and how did they spread?
Yeah, hi, Carter. These false claims and this disinformation campaign began almost immediately after Tuesday's shooting. It started on 4chan, which is a popular platform for far-right conspiracy theorists, and it quickly took off from there. As you mentioned, users were taking photos of 3 different transgender individuals and portraying them falsely as the shooting suspect in this case. All 3 of those individuals have confirmed that they're alive and they weren't involved in this. But by then it was too late. It went from 4chan to Twitter to Facebook and Instagram.
Does this sound real to you? It's like he's making it up as he goes along. 4chan? A far right-wing conspiracy hub? No need to mention political affiliation, as you don't have evidence that the individuals who spread the so-called misinformation are even interested in politics. Let me elaborate. The individuals who claimed it was a transgender have not been identified as affiliated with a political party. Why is that, you ask? Because he didn't show proof of this, he just states the website is where many so-called far-right-wing conspiracy theorists are.
It started on 4chan, which is a popular platform for far-right conspiracy theorists.
This is called suggestive programming, convincing the viewers that the accusers are Republicans and also a representation of the entire Republican Party. So we see what this is truly about, political mudslinging. It never fails. Also, to be honest, if they felt it was a transgender who committed the crime, is that so wrong to point out? Some would say, why does them being transgender matter? Well, not everyone has the same perspective of the transgender community. Some feel they should not be treated any different than others, while others feel they suffer from major psychological and emotional problems. In the latter, those problems would be of concern in believing it was a transgender who carried out the so-called mass shooting. Now you see how I genuinely broke it down, keeping everything neutral and respectful? But the media, and specifically this segment, wants to push the narrative of the transgender community being attacked and slandered by Republicans. Keep in mind, we are politically indifferent. But Democrats have entirely too much fuckery to ignore, so they just can't stay out of the line of fire.
And it quickly took on a life of its own. And it's not just random people on the internet sharing these messages. It's big-name personalities like Alex Jones and Candace Owens, who have large followings, and even Arizona Republican Congressman Paul Gosar sharing a tweet that said that the shooting suspect was transgender.
And there you go, we see clearly this was about attacking the political opponent. Now notice the 2 individuals that he pointed out, Alex Jones and Candace Owens. Stay sharp, because we break down why these 2 were mentioned. Alex Jones, although a disinfo agent, is important in the political matrix. For decades, he has at least brought awareness to the masses about conspiracies. A disinfo agent is not to be trusted, only the information they provide is to be extracted from them. That's all, nothing more. He was mentioned because they had to do damage control about the theory of it being staged, referring to Alex Jones' theory about Sandy Hook. This is to make the theory of it being staged appear crazy, wacky, tinfoil hat conspiracies, as the mainstream media depicts Jones as. Candace Owens is controversial and not afraid to tell the truth about the Democratic Party. Owens is not necessarily to be trusted neither, but at least she is willing to address the problems. They have to discredit Owens, because they can't allow the black community to adhere to what she points out, which is common knowledge in the black community anyway. That's for another episode. So in summary, don't believe it was staged like crazy nut job Alex Jones, and don't listen to Candace Owens, who is not a real black person, because she doesn't support the Democratic Party. Yep, that was the translation. Let's continue.
Yeah, when you take a step back like that and look at the bigger picture, you can really get an idea of how quickly these conspiracy theories can grow. Are these posts still up? And what are the social media platforms doing to combat it?
Yes, some of the posts are still up, Carter. Actually, I was just looking at a few of them before our segment started. We reached out to Twitter. They told us that they're going to require the deletion of any tweet that spreads misinformation and disinformation about the shooting suspect's identity.
Now wait a minute, he didn't just say, quote, spread misinformation, he also said, and disinformation.
Spreads misinformation and disinformation about the shooting suspect's identity.
If you do not know the difference, let's define these terms. Misinformation is false or inaccurate information, especially that which is deliberately intended to deceive. But in some cases, misinformation could simply be a mistake, such as debating world history with inaccurate sources of information. Or, someone spreading the narrative that the so-called mass shooter was transgender. Or Candace Owens, who may have jumped the gun, because that information had spread throughout social media. Yet, we all know Candace Owens is not too fond of the transgender community anyway, so it's magnified. Disinformation, though, is false information which is intended to mislead, especially propaganda, issued by a government organization to a rival power or the media. Alex Jones is an example of a disinfo agent who works for the federal government, pretending to be a so-called truther. He's not the only one. Joe Rogan, Jesse Ventura, David Icke, Mark Dice, Ron Paul, Rand Paul, the list goes on and on. Even celebrities are used as government agents. But the point is, who is the disinfo agent regarding the so-called mass shooting? This would mean, the claim that it was a transgender was issued by a government operative, sent to push misleading and false information through propaganda. Are you admitting that those individuals on 4chan are government operatives? Bingo, trying so hard to mudsling against Republicans, and ended up revealing the truth without even realizing it.
But what's key here is it's the same groups that we have tracked before who have spread misinformation and lies about countless topics like the COVID-19 pandemic and the 2020 election and climate change and so on and so forth. They're now engaging in this disinformation campaign and
this is what we call a political puppet. All of the damage control talking points from the Democratic Party. He asserts that only so-called misinformation and disinformation was used by the same groups regarding the so-called pandemic, the 2020 election, and climate change. Yeah, it's more than, quote, crazy right-wing conspiracy theorists who question all of those issues. A significant percentage of the American population believed the so-called pandemic was not deadly, some believed it was used as fear-mongering, medical tyranny, and others believed it was all one big global sham. A significant percentage of the American population do not believe in a climate crisis, some believe it's a global sham, while others take it into consideration. A significant percentage of the American population believe the 2020 election was rigged, others believe it was fair, and others do not even care. In other words, he does not speak for the American people, he speaks for the Democratic Party and the left-wing media.
Why is this type of disinformation so dangerous?
Well, it can be incredibly dangerous, first of all, for the three individuals in this case whose photos were being used. They had nothing to do with this, but yet they have to defend themselves against these wild accusations and conspiracy theories. It also puts the entire transgender community at risk here because everybody's focusing on them, where the
Incorrect, everyone is not focusing on them. You, and the rest of mainstream media, are focusing on them. The transgender so-called suspect theory is not even the most alarming theory involving the story. It is that it was staged. Think for a second, he decides to focus on the transgender theory and defend the transgender community, instead of defending the so-called lives that were lost that day? The theory that it was staged is an insult to the parents, family members, of the children and adults who were massacred by the shooter, right? That should be his focus, adamantly debunking that theory. In a burning building, he would save the transgender, instead of a child. A brute metaphor, but this is exactly what he's doing in this segment. Defending the transgender community, instead of defending the children's lives lost. The transgender community has organizations that do just fine in defending them. The federal government passes legislation, and even pass laws, to protect the transgender community. And they are capable of speaking out to protect themselves in regards to this so-called mass shooting. Is he a part of the transgender community? Apparently not, because he does not identify himself in any association with that group. It says he is a news tech and political reporter. Nothing about being a part of the LGBTQ community. He does look a bit, quote, compromising. Even still, the children on the other hand, in this case, have not been protected by this dweeb, despite individuals claiming it was staged. If it was staged, then the children are not dead. But he, and the host, cunningly stay away from that theory because it was all about political attacks and using the transgender community as the middleman, or middlewoman, or whatever. I had to take that joke, too tempting. This is what happens when you have a hoax anyway, everything becomes outstandingly retarded. He's done.
The conversation is about guns and how that's hurting children in schools. It's the entire conversation I've noticed following some of these forums and platforms is tied to mental health and illegal immigration, and it has nothing to do with that. It mirrors what we're seeing with Republican lawmakers and a lot of national figures who often, after mass shootings like this, will come out and say that this is a mental health issue and we need to have more resources for that, as opposed to talking about gun restrictions and gun laws changing in this country.
And there you have it in a nutshell, the liberal philosophy. Ignore mental health regarding so-called mass shootings and focus rather on gun laws. They are intertwined, you monumental dipshit. Let's say there was an assault rifle ban for individuals under the age of 21. Or a ban on assault rifles altogether. Do you think this will stop a mentally ill person from going to a school and shooting children? Shotguns, pistols, knives, bombs, poisons, vehicles, and even arsenry are still violent ways to carry out so-called massacres, especially in schools. You don't eliminate so-called mass shootings by banning assault weapons. You eliminate so-called mass shootings by eliminating the mental illness that caused the fucking so-called mass shooting in the first place. Yet once again, this is how the left shows their hand. If an individual purchases an assault rifle, gets in his car, drives to an elementary, barges inside and starts shooting children, isn't this a very disturbed individual? This person is a maniac, inhumane, they are literally out of their mind. But I guess the mental state of the so-called perpetrator is not as important as focusing on the weapon they used. I would give the left the benefit of the doubt if they address both in conjunction. They can't, because if they focus on the mental health, then this concern aligns them with the right, who focus on mental health regarding firearm purchases. The guest proves this.
Is tied to mental health and illegal immigration, and it has nothing to do with that. It's
caught red-handed. Any questions you may have floating around, such as, why does someone need an AR-15, is deflection. Why does someone need a luxury car? Why does someone need $2,000 tennis shoes? People have the right, keyword being right, to purchase what they want. But to blow all of that out the water, the weapons are props, all mass shootings are government experiments, and the media just pushes political propaganda on each side. Both sides are corrupt. Don't vote Democrat, don't vote Republican, don't vote Independent, Progressive, Libertarian, Green, just stop voting completely. The opposition would lose their shit, and the maniacs would be revealed on national television. This is the chaos sector.